Hey everyone, I'm Charles Suggs, developer at SmartLogic.
And I'm Emma Whamond, also a software developer at SmartLogic. And we're your hosts for Season 15, Episode 6. We're joined by Marek Šuppa, aka Mr. Shu, a principal machine learning engineer, head of the data team at Slido, a lecturer of machine learning and natural language processing at Comenius University in Bratislava, as well as the creator of the Missing GitHub Status page, a project reconstructing historical GitHub uptime from archived status data. Today, we're talking about centralized infrastructure, developer trust, and what happens when critical platforms become less reliable.
Hi, Marek. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, glad you could join us. Before we jump into the topic, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you've been working on recently?
It's interesting, and particularly as it connects to our topic today. I actually got my first job off of doing open source contributions on GitHub, and my very first one was with DuckDuckGo, where we were trying to build a search engine that doesn't track you, and a big part of it was being open to the extent possible, which was something that appealed to me, still appeals to me, and ended up contributing so much that I ended up being hired one day. It was difficult to find a boundary there. Then moved on to do machine learning stuff with this company called Slido, which does audience interaction for various audiences, meaning you can do things like Q&A, polling, and generally interact with audiences, large and small. And we got acquired by Cisco a couple of years back, and so that's how I ended up experiencing what a big company life looks like as well. My background is in machine learning and what you would probably call applied research, but much of my time, free time and any other time, has been spent on doing open source, on effectively playing with technology, which is how GitHub comes to play very often into the things that I do.
The search engine that doesn't track you, was that something that became public? What was it?
It is called DuckDuckGo. It still exists, and like the name was. I also thought it was crazy. After it markets itself after a while. It believe it or not, it captures about 5%, or still captures about 5% of the U.S. mobile market. So many people in the U.S., particularly those who want to make sure that there is not a big brother type of an entity that knows as much as it can about their searches, still use it to this day. It also has nice AI integrations as well. And yeah, it started. I was very early. I was like employee number 7 or thereabouts in there. It was a sort of a wild ride and a lifetime opportunity, really, for someone literally on the internet to contribute to something that ended up being ended up making a bit of a round. I encourage you to check it out. It's an interesting place. It's an interesting conceptual play at what the old internet probably wanted to be, and the new internet kind of never ended up being.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a lot of fun. I'm a DuckDuckGo user myself.
Very cool.
Yeah. So speaking of like contributing to the open source community, tell us what inspired you to build the Missing GitHub Status page.
Right. It's interesting to think about. So when you look at the commits, at the actual time when it actually started about 3 years ago, which kind of goes back to the old adage of all the breakthroughs basically overnight successes basically take years to come together. And this was one of those as well, but for a different reason. I noticed in about 2020 something, maybe 2021 or something like that if you go to githubstatus.com, which was their status or is their status page even right now, it will not tell you the aggregate number, or for a long time it did not say any number, any percentages. You would just see the incidents that happened over the past couple of days, I believe, like last 5 incidents or something like that. But the trouble with that is that doesn't really answer my question when I go to the status page, which is like, is it me or is it everyone? And more so, is this something that has been happening, or is it just a random fluke? So I started what my sort of first thought normally is with this situation. I started to capture data, and so GitHub, interestingly itself, has this sort of concept of of flat data. And it's what they I believe they call it, and it's very easy. Basically, sort of capture what a specific URL looks like every single day. And so I basically started to capture what the list of incidents look like for every single day. And that was about it. For about 2 years, that was it. Like I never did anything about it. Part of it was that there was not really much of a reason for it. GitHub wasn't so, I mean, it did not affect me as much, but also I never really had time for it. Like I knew the data was there. I knew I was sort of optionality was there directionally. I could build it. And then the craziest thing happened. I was with my wife in Madagascar this year. I got massively sunburned. So get those creams out if you end up going near the tropics. Is my takeaway. And being sunburned and sort of lying in bed for 5 years, I was like, what are and also having all these tokens ready. I was like, what are some of the things that I haven't really built that I mean probably should be built at some point. And so, short story long, we would say overnight, I basically ended up putting together something I really wanted, which was like, at first, when you are in Madagascar, you basically are not sure if GitHub is broken or your internet connection is broken. So it's like all the time, I was not really sure. But then when you look at January, which is when we were there, it wasn't looking very good for GitHub either. So I was like, I gotta put it together. And so effectively overnight, something like this happened. So it was mostly out of there being data and like me having sort of a directionally kind of a vision that it might make sense, but also effectively not being able to do much else. In summary, I call it out of spite more than out of motivation or anything like it. Like I certainly did not think it would blow up the way it did.
That's interesting. That's a great origin. So for our listeners who haven't seen the project yet, could you explain exactly what it tracks and how it works?
In and of itself, it's very dumb. It's very straightforward, but it also kind of shows that the second you have data in one place, many things can be put together. So what the site does is that it builds up on this flat data narrative, which is every single day and just once a day, which is also why many of the issues that people come to the project with is like how the GitHub's down, how come you are not updated? The reason is it's only does sort of one computation a day. Well, I mean, it computes once a day. And the reason for it is very simple. That's what it used to be historically. So I haven't really tried to optimize it for anything else. It takes data from the incidents. Now, every single GitHub incident is likely associated with some parts of the GitHub platform. So it might impact perhaps all of it, hopefully not, but like perhaps all of it. It might impact the Git operations. It might impact GitHub Actions. You might not be able to render pull requests or might have problems with webhooks and stuff like that. So the next step after sort of extracting the standard metadata is trying to kind of classify it into one of these components of the platform. The interesting thing is that at some point GitHub started to actually label it themselves. So we have some data that comes directly straight from GitHub, but I had about 3 years of data and perhaps 20% of it was labeled. So I did the thing I knew how to do, which was I built a bit of a classifier on top of it. So we have a smallish classifier that will in a kind of few shot way very easily find, or I'm sorry, more correctly, it will be zero shot way. We will find even for incidents that GitHub itself forgets how to label, or like people in there forget how to label. We can provide that. In the README, there's a whole section on how I backtested it and stuff like that. So, like, I cannot help it. I am still kind of a, how do we call it, amateur researcher or amateur academic anyway. So that kind of showed in there as well. And then with those data, we try to kind of render what would be interesting. And the interesting things were just the standard status page you would look at. The status page of, I don't know what what's a sort of solid standard these days. Status page IO, I believe, has been acquired by Atlassian, or some of the other standard status pages where you see what the uptime is for both for the whole platform as well as for its components for the past normally 90 days, as well as the list of incidents. So it kind of tries to recreate what really we could not at the time at least find at GitHub status.com into something reasonable, hence the missing part of the missing GitHub status page.
a coworker showed this to me, I don't know, a couple months ago, and I was like, yes, this is what, like, my brain says the problems are worse than what GitHub status page shows. And this kind of like confirms that. I don't know if it's confirmation bias, but like it feels true to me reading what's there. So what was there something that kind of pushed you over the edge that just like, I know I don't trust these official numbers anymore, that something's up, I need to review the data and see if that backs up what I'm feeling, or if it actually says that I'm not sensing this fully?
I would say that the thing that actually, the thing that motivated me was that really towards the beginning of the year, you could not find any numbers whatsoever at the GitHub status page. Like there would not be, if you take a look at the Wayback Machine, I might provide a link afterwards. If you look at the Wayback Machine, like you will not find, like it's gonna be like a ton of green ticks and that's it. Like everything's green. All systems operational is what it said. That's not useful. That's 100% not useful. So it seems, I cannot claim it, but it seems that this missing GitHub status page did help to, at the very least, kind of, steer the official status page to a position where it's sort of, to some extent, useful. You will see numbers at the very least, right now. So I don't think it was a massive outage to that would push me over the edge, but more like, I have the data already, so it's like, why don't I just render them? And so that's how it ended up happening.
Sounds like you just want to keep GitHub accountable.
It's a one way of looking at it, but then also I honestly am not in the game of trying to, in the game of accountability, and if you look at the issues of the project, like GitHub issues of the missing GitHub status page, which is also something my friends have like my friends who do marketing have been screaming at me, "Are you crazy? Why don't you get missing GitHub status page.com?" To which I basically, my a lawyer sort of inside me says that that's gonna survive like 3 hours or thereabouts, right? So it's it's these days. Well, like the very first thing we get is why do you host missing GitHub status page on GitHub? My answer is I don't like I don't I get the question, but please do understand I'm not trying to push GitHub to do anything. It was more like, look, I'll just show you what the status is that you would provide anyway would look like. So yes, there is a bit of accountability in there too. Yes, like I'm very happy that there is going to be like the actual status page is like does a bit better, at least in my very subjective opinion. But then again, I do think that when you take a look at the platform in aggregate, and it's not like everything's green, that's very like significantly closer to the lived reality, at least to my lived reality, than all systems operational. Hooray, hooray! Very difficult to make it helpful.
I like that. Maybe more of a sanity check for the developers that get to use it. So at this very moment, your tracker shows numbers at about 86% uptime for GitHub over the last 90 days, while GitHub's own page is about 99.79%. What do you think accounts for that gap? Is it methodology? Is it a definition of down? Or why do you think that that's such a large gap there?
We have to be fair to GitHub in here. What the sort of doing this uptime across the whole platform actually renders is that every single downtime that they themselves report as incidents will cause a minute of downtime. In other words, every it's aggregated across the whole platform, and every single potential downtime, which you might not even feel, will show in that will show in the number. So it's like if the issue is region specific, it will still show in the number. If the issue is with some obscure code spaces no one uses, still shows in this number, and like things like that. But then again, I would like to remind people that at the time when I put it together, it was all systems operational and nothing else. So it's like in that sense, it tries to sort of get some picture of what the full platform looks like. I don't think GitHub itself provides the GitHub status page provides a comparable number. And it's to be fair, I get why. Like it's very difficult put to balance what would you want from a sort of uptime number for the whole platform? Meaning, if if a feature is down, does that affect the whole platform? I don't know. If a region is down, does that affect the whole platform? I understand it is difficult, particularly when you are a big company and when there are dollar amounts associated with that. So in that sense, I get why. So this is the absolute simplest way of looking at it, but it also does picture GitHub in a significantly worse kind of state than it really is. Like it's not like it would only have 86% of uptime, but there's a lot of downtime throughout the platform. That's what it tries to say.
I'm looking at it now, and I see you have there's the top line number for the whole platform. And then below that, you do have it broken down by some of the different like services within GitHub, GitOps, webhooks, API requests, etc. And those all paint a little bit rosier picture. So I'm guessing some of what else is going into that larger top line number, or the 86.4%, includes some of the like regions and other information that
No, not
No?
really. If you this is the difference between micro and macro and micro looking at it. So the big difference is that if you took the list of these services, and so for every single one of them, we'll try to kind of basically draw an X for a day when there is something's problematic. It turns out, and that's a different project, but it uses the same data. It's called red squares. For the last year, you would have 32 days of full downtime. Like it's in other words, the difference is that it just aggregates together. Again, reasonable people can completely disagree on how to represent it, but all of it is open source, and I'll happily, I invite people to take a look at themselves or have their agents or clunkers, as we call them these days, look at it too. We don't have to probably anymore, but it's relatively clean code.
Cool. Thanks for explaining that. So, in your opinion, or maybe in your network, do you think that developers' perception of GitHub or GitHub's reliability has changed over the last few years?
It's probably not even the question of whether, but how and how much. As I started with, GitHub has been a relatively big deal, not to the extent that it was to other people. It was a relatively big deal for my development career. That's for sure. And yeah, like when the thing that you depend on on daily basis stops working, what you start to notice. You must have heard about very public pronouncement of Zeke, for instance, leaving GitHub, Ghosty leaving GitHub. Many kind of prominent developers like Armin Ronacher of the Flask fame, or a big name in the Python world, basically wrote a love letter to what was there before GitHub, how GitHub had this career and stuff like that. So it's like totally like there is the perception has changed significantly. It's not just stability and uptime though. That plays a big role, but the way that you used to work with things like GitHub was you expected a person on the other side, and it was sort of a social interaction. We are very, very far off from there anymore. Like the many of the pull requests I review these days are basically from bots. Many projects have to kind of create these gates for bots, which are basically automatically close their pull requests saying, "Thank you very much. Please create an issue and like in your human voice, say 3 sentences about this, and then we'll look at the code again." Okay? They never ever do, mostly because how it works. But like a human probably should. But where I'm trying to get to is that the world has changed. GitHub kind of did evolve as well, of course, but it's like it's the feeling that it's not what it used to be. It's very strongly there.
I read the post from the folks at Zig, and I think they moved to Codeberg, which I believe they might be a collective, and they require like all projects have to be open source, I think.
Yes.
Do you know if folks are moving like proprietary repos outside of GitHub, and where do they go? Do they go to GitLab? Do they go to
So it's often a big part of our discussions. The summary often is that GitLab's not much better. And it's like some of the requests I get are like, can we have this for XYZ, service mostly, it feels that they struck real chord with this accountability issue. To answer your question, they normally will go to something self-hosted. It might be GitLab. It might be realistically Git, the protocol underneath itself. It's very straightforward. Comes out of the Unix tradition at the very least, if not Unix philosophy. An SSH connection somewhere is already a Git server in the sense that you can push towards it if you really wanted to. So it's not such a big deal to host that. That being said, it's way more to GitHub than being able to push code somewhere, right? And so yeah, they normally will move to something self-hosted. The big question is, a big part of what GitHub was interesting about GitHub was you had an account, you could contribute to basically anything. At some point, even private things, as long as you got access. If people start to self-host things, it's gonna be difficult to get the sort of the social aspect of it back. That being said, we should not forget how Git started. Git started from the Linux kernel development and the way it was supposed to be used in the real by the real users was by sending email patches. And so it's not like it would be impossible to use Git differently. It's just that it feels like email patches is probably not where we are, reverting to. Although I would encourage people to try it out. It's way better than it feels like, but it needs a solid email client because they literally will do a review within the the patches themselves. So it's like within the attachments. So oh well.
And we've seen some fragmentation of like the social media landscape as people have left from Twitter and other things and
Right.
gone to a variety of different spaces. You hit on something that I think is kind of important with GitHub and the platform is that it isn't just source control. It's not just a place to host your code that can be shared with a team for collaborative work, right? There's so much more that's been built on top of the base Git protocol with CI/CD. You've got discussions, the whole pull request interface, issue tracking. There's even a little bit of project management that they've built in there. And then, of course, they've added in now a fair bit of AI tooling. There's Copilot. So that if you move to self-hosted, that can be hard to replace a lot of that. It's a lot of overhead, too, that you then have to take on that you haven't had to worry about before. But also maybe could this growing scope be increasing fragility or affecting those core functionalities that we would need?
Right. Well, I mean, it's like this. If I wanted to do an alternative to GitHub today, I would probably use what's called Forjo. It literally is supposed to be spelled as Forjo. That itself is a fork of Git. I believe, and they moved to a license that wasn't really what the community liked. And yes, it feels that there's a need for the basic stuff around hosting code and perhaps a very light project management, as in like, if you have a problem, don't send me an email, put it in here so that other people see it to sort of a way. It does feel like there's legitimate need for that. That being said, what happened with GitHub, and we only get the bits and pieces, but is that GitHub ended up being its own part of Microsoft, its own business unit, I guess is the term, within Microsoft for quite a while, for basically up until the beginning of this year or thereabouts. I think the date. Oh, and I'm sorry. That it's maybe it's like summer last year. I believe it was when the last GitHub CEO Thomas Zunke basically left Microsoft, where they did not replace them. They just sort of merged it into a bigger Core AI, I believe, is the name of the team. And that says something. Like if you're part of the team that's called Core AI and your core competency is hosting code, it kind of hints at potential fragmentation. But then again, I also understand that yes, like being close to code and having Copilot deployed on a massive scale has significant potential. That's for sure. But it's very difficult to say whether this is what let's do it in one way or the other. It is for sure that we can certainly see the hints of what might have caused it. But to be fair to GitHub, given how much code is being generated, like scale of code that's being generated, that has really increased exponentially, and so that also puts a strain, like in a very obvious way on the whole platform.
It's not just about internal changes, but also how those same technologies are driving just a lot more volume.
Right. Right.
There's also some speculation that some of the AI integrations have increased the infrastructure fragility. Is there anything that you could speak on about that?
It, as you said, it's all speculation. I don't think we know one way or the other. It'd be interesting to have this randomized trial experiment in a different world where everything would have happened apart from AI. It might be that GitHub would be the most stable thing ever, and I certainly would not have built it. Like there's no way I would spend probably just fall asleep, even though that's difficult in when you're sunburned. But what I'm trying to say is that it really may be that it's sort of just collusion of events that were not completely dependent on one another, but ended up getting to something like this. That being said, I do think there is a the many of the kind of the AI offerings that ended up integrated within GitHub are sort of done in a way which kind of by itself, like in and of itself, will generate more code, hit the APIs more often, will interact with them more often. So if someone directly asked me, like, could this mean that the infrastructure has to play catch up to all these new features that have been built? I could easily see that happening, but you would need a real insider for confirmation here. I don't really know.
Anyone on GitHub wants to come tell us inside story, look us up.
In our email exchange, you joked that GitHub may not even be relevant by the time we record this episode. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I think I'm not sure. When is that email dated? But it's like at the time it was either February or March, maybe even. But even if it was like in like April, like GitHub, this web page of mine has it at like 78% of uptime. Like it says under 80. I was like there were like 5-6 days, mostly weekends, when there was no outage. Like every single day there was something which probably also pushed some of these projects to move over there. So it's like I do think there was reasonable doubt whether it would survive. The other thing is that is the story of the CEO. So the CEO basically co-founded a company that's GitHub, but on steroids and for agents. I believe the name is I think it's called Entire. It's basically what I play on. Okay, if it's agents that create this code, what we probably want is not just the code itself, but the discussion with the agent or whatever tool calls and whatever exploration it did for it to arrive at this code. If there's trouble with the code, it's likely that either the instruction was wrong, it got sidetracked, or something of the order. So if we want to do it well, if we want to do reviews well, we need to have everything in the same place. So it's like that's the company at least in my very limited understanding, that's the company that he co-founded. And it kind of shows like in the future we probably will need something that goes that way, at least directionally, if not directly directly product wise. I mean, Nassim Taleb would tell you by the Lindy principle, if something ended up being a staple for 10 years, probably has 10 more years left. In the final year, no one will even know the name, but like it will probably exist in some way, shape, or form. So I did overdo it, but I do think there will be a relatively significant, like, the playing field is open for other entrants. So that's sort of what I jokingly meant. But I'm happy it's not completely down. I genuinely am very happy that it's still possible to collaborate with people there. I'm happy we got to do this discussion too.
So you mentioned a lot of the downtime over the last few months. I was reading about April 23rd, there was a merge queue bug that silently reverted commits in over 2,000 PRs. And that wasn't really about scale. It was an architectural mistake. Again, you said that we could sit here and, make guesses as to what is really going on. But the core of it is that maybe developers are feeling that they've become overly dependent on platforms like GitHub. What happens to developers' workflow when critical infrastructure becomes unreliable? What do you think about the dependency on platforms like GitHub for developers?
Well, it is a very good question. I would kind of go to the roots. Like, that's not how Git was supposed to be working. Like, Git, it's in itself. You open the main page, and it says Git is a fast, scalable, distributed revision control system. The second we have a singular place where all the code lives, how is that like, so in that sense, yeah, we created a sort of singular dependency, which when it doesn't work, thankfully we still can work locally, and then hope we didn't put too much info into the pull request that has been reverted, or that has been completely lost. That being said, the trouble is that has been kind of the story of the modern internet, has it not been, right? So, like, the way internet has been set up was for it to for one node to go down, and you would not really notice from the old DARPA ages, and so that's not really good the case. Go ask people in Spain, for instance. They cannot push to GitHub when there is La Liga playing. There are literal websites which is basically will ask, like, is La Liga playing, just so that, because they cannot work. And the reason for that is that the Cloudflare is legally blocked, because La Liga has well, it's a too sad of a story to even go to. But like where I'm trying to highlight with that is that unfortunately, that it's not just GitHub. It's that many pieces of the modern infrastructure on the internet have gotten very far away from the decentralized way in which they've been designed. And so yes, like, if we end up dependent on platforms like GitHub, they better work. In fact, the way Git at least I don't remember the story perfectly, but I don't think the way Git happened was that Linus was basically massively pissed about the BitKeeper, I think, or something else that they've been using, and was basically like, okay, guys, we are stopping kernel development for 2 weeks unless we build something else. Like, there's no way, there's no way we can work this way. So it's like, it might be that we reach a critical point where a sort of critical mass will decide that this is not the way to not the way to work, and something else will happen. But I'm not saying, like, if this sort of split of, like, the social networks or kind of the groups of people has shown anything, it's a very difficult to do federated and at the same time have kind of network effects, I guess is what we would call it. How do you make it so that people then very easily migrate from platform to platform? How do you make it so that your stuff has the reach across various platforms and stuff like that? There is, for instance, a big movement of publishing on your own and then syndicating across various platforms. The home take points is basically the platforms will generally fight you as much as they can. The reason for that is what they want is for it to be commercially viable. So there's this push and pull of how many of these things have been designed to what a kind of business narrative around it would be. So unfortunately, it feels like sort of code and the way kind of platforms like GitHub are set up are kind of stuck in between, unfortunately.
I think we're set later this season to talk with someone who is part of building the Activity Pub protocol, which is one of the protocols out there for enabling, for lack of better terms, interoperability between social networks. So there's a lot of common threads that are coming out of our conversations this season without really trying. It's interesting how it all kind of comes together sometimes. As teams are maybe thinking about how to move back towards that more distributed kind of intention behind the internet, reduce our dependence on centralized infrastructure, have you seen success with teams or have you seen teams have success with particular parts of their operations that they're moving back towards something more distributed?
I think it very much depends on what your end customer, or if you want to use a product management term, job to be done, would look like. In other words, it's probably very different if you're trying to do open source contributors from around the world. Please come contribute to my open source. I'm relatively young, still, I hope at least, but I still do remember what it was back in the day when you basically got the link with source code and that was about it. Sending a patch basically meant you're sending it to the ether, and it never comes back. Being able to navigate obscure settings even basically meant iterating over suggestions that you find on mailing lists and stuff like that. What I'm trying to say is that it's probably different when you're trying to do kind of public facing open source versus when you are developing in a team within a company, the code that hopefully doesn't really leave. But even there, I do think there is value in replicating what GitHub has done, which is even if you don't have a full singular monorepo, at the very least everyone having access everywhere where they legally can have access I've seen play massive benefits, and that you can do in a relatively decentralized way, in the sense that doesn't have to be a singular platform as long as you have access everywhere. In that sense, I do think maybe that's what happens. The way people went from SVN to whatever Mercurial to Git, maybe they will revert back to something in their kind of work life, and then might sort of transpire or to some extent be ported to what we see in public open source. I have seen folks sort of try things like, I don't know, SourceHut, Forjo, as we discussed, and stuff like that, or Codeberg. And I do think it makes sense to at least try it out. But it also very much depends on what do you value in that. Big value of GitHub was everyone has accounts, everyone can contribute. If they contribute, you can see it on their profile. Many people I know, myself included, have gotten jobs off of contributing, on these platforms. It's sort of to be seen to what extent that happens if you have a very small platform where there's not much in there. And then if you have a small platform, not much in there, how likely is it to be more stable than a big than a big GitHub that, for all its faults, at least has I'm pretty sure very good DevOps team that takes care of it. This probably was going to be a problem, not just the kind of scattered nature of it, but also that I have kind of hosted services for all my professional life at the very least, and it's hard. It's hard work, and so in that sense, it would probably need to be a sort of semi-bigger player for it to actually matter.
Well, for where the ecosystem is right now, it sounds like your project, the Missing GitHub Status page, is a good place to start. Could you let our listeners know where to find the project, how to contribute to it, or where to follow your other work?
The best way to find it is to basically look up the Missing GitHub Status page. The craziest, I'm very bad at doing any marketing, really. It turns out that other people did it for me. I did not really even try. So look up Missing GitHub Status page. You cannot miss it. The repo is very open. There is we still take pull requests even in this agentic day and age. Strangely enough, I did not have to fight against a massive amount of slop. Even if it was agentically generated, it wasn't something that I could not have a nice discussion with the person on. So if you find something that doesn't make sense, if you find things that don't seem to adapt, or that you think could look nicer, send a pull request or just start an issue and we'll discuss it in there the absolute old school way, the way it's not all the way to mailing list, but we'll have a nice internet discussion about it, and we'll arrive to something. If you scroll down the page, you will even see that I try to make it so that even if we end up just using just part of the code that people create, we'll still credit them. So it tries to be this very positive piece of the old internet in the business of the word.
We'll make sure to put a link to it in the show notes as well.
For sure.
Well, thank you for joining us, Marek. Our guest is Marek Šuppa. or Mr. Shu, creator of the Missing GitHub Status page. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks a lot.